No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
There are a lot of really huge changes to the way we work and interact with each other that are happening right now. And not only do we not know how we're going to come out the other side, but we don't know what life is going to look like when we do come out the other side. And there have been some really strong examples of good and bad leadership all over the news, all over the place that I've read. And some of them are surprising. There are some stories that I've read and seen of surprisingly good leadership, meaning I didn't expect it coming from that company or that person. And there have been some surprising examples of poor leadership where I didn't expect that coming from a person who, or a company who's largely positively portrayed in the media. And so what I'm wondering is, have you seen leadership change in a time of crisis to the point where it leads you to believe that some leaders are actually better than others when it comes to leading in a time of crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there's certain competencies and skills and ways that leaders show up and kind of core values that drive how people lead every single day. And I think in times of crisis or, in those situations where there's a lot of either stress or compression, whatever that might look like, I think that what ends up happening is that leaders default to their truest version of themselves.
Sure.
And, in all situations. And some people some people lose composure. Some people become, self-protective, and it's just about them and what they need and what they want. And then other people show up and they give freely and they figure things out and they maintain their composure. So yeah, absolutely. I think that whenever you have big tests like this, and I know this is kind of an extreme case, and I think it happens in the micro quite often, is that when things take a turn of the unexpected, then I believe that that's when people truly show their truest form of who they are, what they believe, because in not knowing how things are going to go or how they're going to play out, most people will just turn into what they believe is the truest form of themselves to be able to work through those types of situations. It's very hard to wear the mask and be somebody else and maintain a level of maybe who you want to be aspirationally when you don't even know what's going on and you're doing your best to kind of work through it.
Right. It's the lizard brain, right? Like we devolve into our most animalistic. I'll take a quote from Gary Vee that I like a lot. He talks about how people rail on social media. He says social media has changed people. It's made people worse. And he says, no, it's not true. Social media doesn't make you better or worse. It just amplifies what you already are. And I would say that times of crisis, I think, are largely the same thing. I think there are leaders who do a great job of kind of faking it and being different versions of who they really are because they have no choice. Because if who they really are came out, they wouldn't be able to lead very effectively. And so they do a good job of hiding it, of changing it. And when we devolve back to our lizard brain and in a time when we don't know what's going on. And I think it's less about crisis and more about uncertainty. Meaning if we'd been told, okay, this is going to have a vaccine in 3 months, and by 3 months we'll all be able to get back to the way it was, it's still a crisis, but then you've removed the uncertainty. And I think that is largely the biggest variable in how people kind of devolve or evolve into this. It's this being able to lead in times of ambiguity or uncertainty that I think is more telling than just a crisis. I think people can get through a crisis if they have a clear path out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's and this happens quite a bit in leadership. We talk about kind of working in situations where as the leader you don't have all of the information, or you have some of the information, or there's something that changes dramatically in the industry or locally for some reason, and everybody looks to you as the leader to either have the answer or to provide the direction or what's going to happen next. And there's a big part of that, an element of leadership where you have confidence in knowing that you may have seen things similar in your past, or you've been through similar types of experiences. And while this might not be the same thing, it's kind of close enough to where what you should be doing and in what order. And I think for situations like this, where the uncertainty is there and you really have no idea. And, I was talking to some people today and somebody brought up, nobody has led through this type of a situation in our lifetime. Therefore, we don't know exactly, what this looks like or how it might play out. What we do know is that our role in leadership is to make sure that we are supporting our people, engaging our people, and doing whatever we can within our control to provide them with an experience that they appreciate and that allows them to find some comfort in knowing that there are people out there looking out for them for their best interest. And I think that's for me, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's more about the uncertainty element that causes this to be much harder for a lot of leaders than kind of knowing what's going on, even though you have to deal with it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I have two thoughts on this. One, when you talk about how, the job of a leader in terms of being there, I think leaders oftentimes confuse the expectation of an answer with the expectation of a solution. And I think there are a lot of leaders out there who they don't know what the solution is. And to their defense, they don't need to know. They don't have to know. There's not, all the information isn't out there. There's no way an individual leader knows the solution to all of this, especially if you're in a large organism of an organization and there are several moving parts. You might not be a decision maker at the top end of your organization. When your people are looking for answers, they're not. They say they're looking for answers, and you might think that means they're looking for a solution. And I think a lot of leaders hear that, and then they kind of withdraw and they hide. They go into hiding, or they become unavailable because they're terrified of being put on the spot, being asked a question that they don't have the answer to, they don't have the solution to. And I would argue that when your people are asking for answers, what is good enough, especially in a situation like this, is an acknowledgement of how they're feeling, empathy for how they're feeling, and transparency of the fact that there are some things you don't know the answer to. There are some things that are being worked on. There's some things you're working on. There are some things that are being worked on above your pay grade, whatever that may be, whether that's at the private sector level or the government level. And there are things that you just don't know the answers to yet. I think when individual employees get stressed out, it's when they think the information is out there, but they can't get a hold of it. And when their leaders are being very forthcoming with whatever information they have, and also forthcoming with whatever information they don't have, that satisfies that. That checks off those boxes and is the definition of good leadership in a time of crisis. You don't have to be able to solve the problem. You just need to be able to show your people that you're sitting on this roller coaster ride with them. You're not kind of controlling it from the booth elsewhere where you're not being impacted by it. So that's the first thought I have. The second thing that I want to say is that these situations are really good for testing people's principles. And we talk about, leading in a time of crisis, you see who the real person is. You see what a person's principles are. And so I'll give you an analogy that I like. Most people who, if you ask, do you support free speech? They'll say, sure, Okay, but start giving them really terrible examples, like just the most abhorrent, terrible examples of how people have pushed the boundaries of what we consider free speech in society. Now, I won't go into them now, but everybody can think of them. Do you still support it then? Well, it's okay if you don't. Everybody has their breaking point, so to speak. But this is one of those things where if you say, I'm a passionate advocate for my employees, I will always put them ahead of me. Okay. But if you're saying that, really think about how that fits into a situation like this, because it takes these kind of extreme situations for you to really see where your principles are and where they're not. And it's okay if these situations alter what your principles are. We've talked about this on the show in the past, where when it comes to working for a company and maybe some things they're doing don't align with your values. Well, sometimes those things that don't align with your values aren't enough to get you to quit. They're things you can kind of live through or work through or try to change. Other times they're deal breakers and you want to quit. This is the exact same thing. When you reach your breaking point, you have to decide, were these really my principles or were they not? And I think leaders who get kind of chastised for not leading well are leaders who try to be this all or nothing, like, this is my principles, this is what I'm sticking to, and then they can't hold to it in a time of crisis.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. Is if you live in a space as a leader where you can be the aspirational version of yourself when things are going well and things are kind of regular and there's consistency and like that type of stuff, and then it becomes really difficult when these types when a crisis happens and now people are looking to you to be that person right now, and it's hard to balance all of those things and juggle all of those thoughts about you and your leadership. So no, I think that it's definitely something that it's testing a lot of people right now. And I also think that there's an element of if you're in a situation where you're working through some of these challenges and changes and leaders maybe are not showing up for you exactly how you feel they should be, there's also a little bit element of grace here, right? As I mentioned earlier, this is new for everybody. There's plenty of things that as a leader that I'm doing that I feel are just the right thing to do. I'm trusting my gut and my instincts. Doing things that I believe that feel right or I should. But that doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean that it's impactful. It doesn't mean that it's effective. It doesn't mean that it's the ultimate way of making people feel engaged and empowered. For all of us right now, we're kind of making this up and doing our best with what we have given. And so like there's also an element of that knowing that everybody is in that space, right? No matter where you are within an organization or a company, every single person, between you and the CEO, including the CEO, is going through something for the first time where everybody is making calls that they feel are the best calls. And for some companies and organizations right now, you can read it in the news. You see the amount of people that are being furloughed or laid off or that type of thing. Some companies are having to make a decision and a choice right now to either try to do their best to survive so that there's a place for people to come back to, or doing everything they can to help support the community with the hope that they'll somehow get recognized or rectified from the government in regards to funding. Like there's a lot of people making some choices right now, one way or the other, that only time will tell if that was the right choice. And we as leaders also fall into that same exact bucket, is in that we're going to make some decisions and some choices and some approaches to certain things that will end up, panning out and it was the right thing to do. And there'll be some that fall flat, they don't work out well, and we have to learn from them and move on.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me ask you a question then. What do you think are some of the qualities of a person who leads well in a time of crisis? Are there things that you don't really have to summon on a daily basis that you found that you've had to summon when interacting with people who report up through you over the last month?
Empathy is the easy answer, but it's also to me like the realist answer, because, and what I mean by that is like there's the empathy that you normally have as a leader in the day-to-day business, and things happen and situations happen and things like that. What we're dealing with right now from an empathy standpoint, in the right balance of it, in balancing of EQ and IQ, is people are going through this in very different ways. Some people are having to deal with households where, as I mentioned, the layoffs or furlough or people being sick or family members being sick and they can't see them, or like there's so many dynamics right now that are happening that make my experience in this situation vastly different from somebody else's, that I really have to consider that in thinking about how I communicate, what I say, what I can provide, versus 90% of the time in day-to-day business, we have so many similarities going on because like the jobs and the normal flow of what we do every day is kind of the consistent thing that brings us together to align. So we can all say that we're all potentially either working from home or doing video chats or whatever we're doing and say that's the consistency, but like that's not actually, like there's so much behind that with where people are at and what they're going through. So like that for me is probably something I have to really, I've had to think about a lot is, if I'm talking with somebody who is dealing with somebody in their family that is infected, or somebody is dealing with a spouse who no longer has an income, like these are things that we don't normally have to deal with, but we are right now. And how does that impact their ability to do what they're needing to do, and how do I support in a really unique, different way, and try to help to, I can't provide solutions to everything, but I can definitely be an ear, and be a shoulder to lean on, and be somebody who's available to have conversations with people that are going through stuff that I'm not, myself having to go through.
Sure. It's easy to have empathy for on-the-job struggles on a daily basis, because if you're a leader of a team, chances are you encountered them yourself at some point in your past. And so, again, if having empathy is just the ability to kind of shoulder the burden for them and walk in their shoes and kind of feel what they're feeling, yeah, it's easy to feel what they're feeling because you probably dealt with the same struggle a year before, or 6 months before, or 5 years before. But the way that we are struggling right now is so individualized for each person. I know I mentioned on my Thoughtful Thursday last week about how the struggles that my wife and I are going through with homeschooling our kids, and a lot of other parents are too. But we're doing that from the comfort of knowing that we're working from home. And there are so many parents out there who are in the exact same boat as us. They're having to become homeschoolers of their kids who are not going back to school for the rest of the year, but they're also expected to be at a job 40 hours a week and then do that. And maybe they relied on the school as being the daycare for the morning part of their day or the afternoon part of their day, and they don't have that anymore. So, just the empathy has gone from how can I help you get through something to really there's nothing I can do to help you get through this besides making sure that you know that nothing you have to do right now, no pivoting and no last minute changes that you have to do right now is going to impact my impression of you in any way, because I know that you're having to make these decisions on the fly and sometimes last minute. And at the end of the day, your family and your health and your overall well-being is far, far more important than whatever conference call you said you were going to be on with me, or whatever commitment you had made to me that was work related. That is where our empathy has to end right now, because oftentimes we really can't relate to what somebody else is going through.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, I'm going to reference a Forbes article called Why Are Some Leaders Better at Managing a Crisis by Tomas Chamorro, and we'll link to the article in the podcast description. He talks about 4 things that kind of set apart leaders who are good at leading in a time of crisis versus those who are not. He says intelligence, accurate threat sensitivity, courage, and trustworthiness. And to me, what those mean, intelligence to me means how smart are you and how well informed are you on what the process is, be it from whatever information your government is putting out, state, local, federal, whatever information your company is putting out and how those relate together. Don't be the person who doesn't know all the information, because it's really difficult to make intelligent decisions if you don't have all the data. Know all of the data that you have access to. Don't put that on the side. Second one being accurate threat sensitivity. Know how these things actually impact people. We just spoke about having empathy for your employees. This is what that means. Know how this threat is going to be affecting some people differently than it's affecting you, and keep that in mind when you're laying out expectations for your employees. 3, courage. Have the courage to make some tough decisions. It's okay. You will make some wrong ones and you will make some right ones, but if you ground them in your values and you put your people in front of it, you will be more likely to make the right decisions. And the 4th one is trustworthiness, and I think this is the most important one. Don't mischaracterize anything you're doing. Don't avoid your people because you don't have the right answer or you don't think you have the right answer and you want to wait till you do. Just being able to say, I don't know the answer, and I'm being transparent about that, and here's what I do know, and here's what we can work through together. Those are the things that employees want when you don't actually have the answers. So don't ever lose your ability to have your people trust you by telling them things that you think are right, but you don't actually know for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and that's a great advice. And I think one of the things that I've seen, over the last couple of weeks here are there are a ton of great articles, resources, podcasts, people talking about, advice and insight and leading through times like this. And I think the more things that we can consider as leaders to help us gain perspective and thoughts on how we approach this work, I think the better for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite quotes of all time is that courage is not the absence of fear. Rather, it's the acknowledgement that there is something more important than fear. And when a lot of your decision making as a leader has to be rooted in that, it's this you have to face it and move forward with it head on, and understand that if you are doing daily work to put your people at the front of where your values are, that you will come out on the other side of this better than you entered it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode